Well, the U.S. and Russian diplomats are holding talks aimed at defusing tensions over Russia's military buildup along the Ukrainian border. They met for about 7 hours yesterday in Geneva, and discussions will continue tomorrow in Brussels. Both sides are staking out their positions on the future of the NATO alliance and the deployment of troops in Eastern Europe. The U.S. has raised fears that Russia could be preparing to invade Ukraine, but Moscow is denying any plans to do so. So Nancy Cordes is at the White House with more on all of this. Nancy, thanks for joining us now. So as I understand it, there was a lot of talk, but little in the way of progress and action. What can you tell us about, what unfolded yesterday?
Well, both sides said, Anne-Marie, that these talks were frank, that they were detailed, that they were serious. The fact that there were no major breakthroughs announced was not entirely a surprise. Both sides had sort of lowered expectations for some big announcement to come out of these talks. American officials saying, look, anything that gets discussed is going to need to be run by our European allies. It's going to need to be discussed at the State Department with the White House here in Washington. So don't expect that, we're going to shake hands and have some big new deal to announce. But that doesn't mean that they aren't making progress behind the scenes. And it was fascinating to see the Russian foreign minister come out and tell reporters yesterday, we have no intention of attacking Ukraine. Nobody needs to worry about an escalation there. That was sort of new language. And frankly, the U.S. officials are quite skeptical about that. They say, if you're not planning to attack Ukraine, why do you have 100,000 Russian troops amassed along the border? We don't know of any exercises that would require that many people.
Yeah, can you put that in writing, perhaps? Something concrete about that? I'm sure both sides have sort of their non-negotiables, their non-starters, the red line in the sand. Have they spelt out, just what they're not willing to put up with?
They have, and frankly, a lot of the Russian red lines are things that the U.S. is simply not going to agree to. One of the things that the Russians say that they want is for Ukraine to not be allowed to align itself with NATO or with the West. You can imagine why the Russians want that. Ukraine sits along a large part of Russia's border. It is a former Soviet territory. They don't like the fact that so many of these former Soviet territories are turning toward the West. Well, U.S. officials have said all along, hey, that's for Ukraine to decide. Russia doesn't get to decide who Ukraine aligns itself with. That's up to Ukraine. That's up to NATO. We're not going to put any limits on Ukraine in that fashion or anybody else. So that is a big bone of contention. Another thing that Russia wants that it probably won't get is for the U.S. to promise not to increase troop levels in the region in Eastern Europe, perhaps even to remove some troops. The U.S. says it's not going to do that, even though President Biden has said he doesn't intend to send more troops into Ukraine unless there's some big major crisis. Now, some of the things that the Americans say that they are willing to do is to pull back some U.S. missile systems in the region. And they used to have a treaty with Russia that had to do with just this. But they say the Russians violated it. The U.S. ended up canceling it, and they may be willing to reinstate that. But it's not clear whether that's going to be enough to mollify the Russians. And they say they're not going to do anything. The U.S. won't make any moves, they argue, until they start to see that Russia is removing some of these troops, sending them back to their barracks.
So, it's one thing for Moscow to say there are no plans to invade Ukraine, but that statement, I'm sure, would be sort of solidified if there were consequences for any sort of invasion. And so that brings me to the Biden administration and whether or not they have spelt out what they would be willing to do in terms of support for Ukraine should Russia invade.
Yes, the Americans and the Europeans together in a very unusual joint communication have made it clear that they are ready to impose massive sanctions on Russia beyond the sanctions it has already experienced for past incursions if it were to invade Ukraine. Now, how much impact that's going to have on Russia's thinking remains to be seen. They haven't spelled out exactly what kind of sanctions we're talking about, though you can imagine that perhaps they got into greater depth in those talks in Geneva. But what they want to do is send a message to Russia: look, you are going to be severely hampered from doing business with the West. We may cancel a very important pipeline to you if you do not stand down and if you are aggressive towards your neighbors. This is a fight, though, that is intensifying not just in Ukraine, but in other parts of the region. Just this week in Kazakhstan, we saw that there was unrest there, people protesting against their government, protesting against high gas prices. Russian troops came in to quell the protest, because anything that looks like a pro-democracy protest, again in a former Soviet territory, is something that is troubling to the Soviets, to the Russians rather, to the president, Vladimir Putin in particular, because he really reveres the notion of the Soviet Union that is long past, of this sphere of influence that Russia has amongst all of these neighbors, and he's eager to reestablish that.
Well, I suppose the good news is that they are still talking, and that'll happen tomorrow. And as I understand it, Ukraine will be present, which is also a little bit of a shift, because I feel like a lot of times these conversations happen around Ukraine, but they're often not involved. So I look forward to the update from you, Nancy. Thank you very much.
You got it.